Welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of Halloween Movie Madness. How is that, Nim? How are we having Halloween Movie Madness in November? Well, we are giving you two. That's right, count 1, 2, 2 bonus episodes of Halloween horror festivities here on Cinema Crusaders. So this is a movie I was really looking forward to talking about. I can't wait to talk about it with my co-host today. Unfortunately, one of our co-hosts is absent because he's feeling a little under the weather. So to Steve, Shadewing Sellers, I hope you're feeling better. And Lance is off making films. Hopefully he is doing a great job. We can't wait till we can welcome him back. But I am joined by my second in command at Raincross Press. He has got all sorts of stuff going on, including Mr. Happy, who he has drawn. He is a writer and an artist on Blood World for Raincross Press, an unbelievable reviewer. He's on the Sloppy Spoilers podcast with me, as well as doing this. He does stuff for Comic Crusaders. I'm talking about none other than Jeff Baracey. How you doing, Jeff?
You must be possessed to offer people 2 extra weeks of Halloween movie madness.
Hey, you know, you got to give the people what they want, you know? So.
I'm glad we're doing this because, like, I know this film and the film that's going to follow are a couple of my favorite films. So,
absolutely, I can't wait to talk about. I think it's funny that they're both very Catholic. I don't know what that says about Catholics and horror movies, but there you go. No, I'm really looking forward to this. And then I'll be honest with you. 2 weeks from today, we are going to be doing a movie that I know Jeff has not seen, and I can't wait to get your take on it, which is Rush, featuring Daniel Bruhl and Liam Hemsworth starring in the two starring roles in that movie, and it's about the 1976 F1 title battle. So,
yeah, it's that's going to be interesting because, like, it's rare that we post up a movie that I haven't seen, so I'm pretty excited to catch something for the first time, put some fresh eyes on it.
Just to give you and the
I'll
viewers,
take the Steve spot for a change.
Yeah, just to give you and the viewers a little sneak peek. The 1976 F1 race was between two characters. One, real people, but they were characters themselves. One was named James Hunt. He's played by Liam Hemsworth. He was an English driver, complete crazy man. Would show up drunk and throw up before F1 races. His overalls said "Sex, Breakfast of Champions" on them. That's what.
And there's something about being, you know, drunk and behind the wheel.
Yeah.
You're going to put him in an F1? What?
Yeah. I mean, the guy was just a complete wild man, just enjoyed life. Meanwhile, his opposite number, played by Daniel Bruhl, was a guy named Niki Lauda. And Niki Lauda was a very meticulous Austrian. Everything was calculated. Everything had to be measured. He knew all the ins and outs and everything. So
he's Austrian, but he understands the particularities of being very German and things. Everything must be precise, my friend.
Exactly. And so you had these two playing off each other and these two unlikely people and their relationship, and then against the title battles. I hope that you guys will enjoy it. Yeah. So very cool. So before we get into this movie, I did want to share this with all of you. I found the trailer for this film from 1990s. We're going to go ahead and take a look at that. And then we're going to get right into talking about Exorcist 3. So you ready to check out this trailer?
Let's do it.
All right. Here we go.
17 years ago, an extraordinary motion picture touched our most profound, nameless fears. Do you dare walk these steps again? Death be not proud, nor canst thou kill me. Satan grows stronger.
You believe in possession, Father?
He has found a haven.
Come to take a little blood from you, Father.
He has taken possession.
The boy had been crucified.
His web widens.
I've just never seen anything like this in 20 years.
Inside this cell,
The killer drove an ingot into each of his eyes and cut off his head.
inside A man.
Who are you? I am no one.
A man
So
we
good.
thought had died 17 years ago.
He is
Oh, man.
He will never get away.
We are going to talk about that guy.
This time you're going to lose. The real terror is back. George C. Scott in William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist III.
Outstanding. All right. So, The Exorcist 3. So, we kicked off Halloween movie madness all the way back in October with The Exorcist. And we're coming now to the end, towards the end of Halloween movie madness, and we're doing The Exorcist 3. Now, why did we skip over 2? We skipped over 2 because it sucks. Thank you, Jeff. It
sucks a lot.
Horrible. It's an absolutely horrible story. It makes no sense. The real sequel to The Exorcist is this movie. So let's just break it down real quick, and then we're going to get into talking about this. Basically, what has happened is that, like the film said, 17 years ago, Damien Karras supposedly died. But what really happened was that his body was used as a vessel and possessed and regenerated the brain cells. He's been in a mental institution all this time, regenerating since he broke out of his coffin. And now that he is back, and his body is taken over by a character, and we're going to get to talking about that because I'm going to let Jeff reveal a little bit of that, and we're going to talk about that character and some stuff. But this character is bound and determined to do a number of things through a series of killings across Georgetown, across Washington, D.C. This film, I think, is much more of a traditional horror film than the original Exorcist was, but there still is very, very much that possession angle. There's very much that paranormal, supernatural creepiness angle. It's just, I think, that we get more jump scares. We get more visual imagery. I mean, The Exorcist had his share of visual imagery, but they dial it up to 11 here, to the point where I think I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. Does it take away from it, or is it good from the movie, or is it good that they added that in? So with that said, we got to talk about the characters. And the first character I think we have to talk about, there's 2 characters that kind of go together. I forget his name.
Well, we got to talk about the Kinderman kid.
The first murder?
Yeah, I know that guy. I know him well.
Do you? All right.
I have a special connection to the film through that young man.
Well, let's hear about that. Let's hear about that first.
His name is James Burgess. He goes by Keto, or sometimes Buddy Man, a character he develops. He is an actor. I worked with him at the Ripley's Haunted Attraction here in Myrtle Beach, and also at the Nightmare Haunted House for several years. And I have a signed copy of The Exorcist 3 that he signed for me. He hasn't hit it big or anything, but he continues to act. And that was his very first role. In his very first role, he got to act opposite George C. Scott in one scene. And in particular, if you remember the very opening scene where the dream sequence is going on, and you pass him in the alley, and then as you get to the end of the block, he's there at the end of the block with Rose. Mm-hmm. He told me when they passed by, he had to haul ass to get in front of the cameraman to make his mark. It's you do that a couple times, you get winded even when you're that young. I think he was only 12 at the time.
Wow. Well, I will say his character dies rather horribly, as do many of the people who die in this movie. And it's for a reason. And the reason is because Damien Karras, the role is reprised by Jason Miller from the original Exorcist. And Jason Miller is an incredible actor, and I'm going to hand him off to you in just a second, has been possessed, and inside of his body is the James Veneman. And I'm going to let Jeff reveal more about James Veneman. But James Veneman is played by Brad Dourif. And
the voice of Chucky, for those of you who aren't in the know.
Yes. And he splits. So those two are going to split scenes in the same person, but it's done so well and so seamlessly. And there's a reason they do it. And I am now going to hand it off to Jeff, because this is one of the coolest part about this movie and why this is a true sequel. So, Jeff, go ahead and take this away, talk a little bit about it, and then let's talk about the performance of these two.
Now, here's the funny thing. The very first time I watched this movie, I actually didn't like it, surprisingly.
Okay.
And I had to rewatch it again because I guess I was probably comparing it to the original Exorcist. And it's a very different film, as you've rightly stated. This is more of a legit horror film, even with the possession angle, because possession is horrifying as it is.
Mm-hmm.
But this is actually it has the tropes that you would expect, but it's shot wonderfully. It's tightly paced. It's got the jump scares, and they're not cheap jump scares, I don't feel like. And when we get to this this whole idea of the Gemini character, and just some of the things at the time I felt like were a little hokey, but like when I went back and watched it later, a few years later, it's kind of like when my first viewing of Flash Gordon in the 80s, I wasn't very satisfied with that. I was looking for something different, and I went back with fresh eyes like, oh no, I was totally wrong. This is great. So, and the idea of like me having issues with the film, it never came around to scenes like this. The scenes with Damien Karras and the Gemini killer, and that's Brad Dourif's personality as a serial killer, a long dead, 15 years dead serial killer who was found drifting his way towards hell by one of Lucifer's many demons, or as he likes to call this particular demon, the Master, who stuck him in Father Karras's body before his soul was actually able to leave his corpus.
It is, by the way, it is Pazuzu who did all this from the first Exorcist. I have read the book.
Okay, so it's still Pazuzu.
Yeah.
All right. I wasn't entirely sure, given the way that Dourif or the Gemini would talk about. Yeah. It almost seemed like he was talking about the Master and the people inhabiting, or the demon inhabiting Reagan being as two separate entities. And like certain parties were upset, and and like the Master was going to fix that. And there is of course the revenge angle, and I especially thought like when he runs into the other priest, I was like, oh, so Pazuzu really gets around. He's been there for a couple of different exorcisms. So I thought that perhaps it was a different demon. So Pazuzu, which
I'm
makes sense.
looking forward to talking to you about that, because we'll get to that. We'll get to some scenes.
Because this film is written and directed by the author of the book. So, it's 100% legit. And I love the fact that this time he wasn't so precious, being very Tolkien-esque, if you will, the way he was with like the first movie and the scripting and the demands that he put on. He actually, it feels like Blatty really understood the process of filmmaking a little bit better after that experience, and he tightened things up. He moved things. The pacing's a lot better here. But yeah, Jason Miller, as we said, is amazing, and Brad Dourif is a treasure. This guy is, highly trained actor, so versatile. He's been typecast, unfortunately, as playing a lot of bad guys, a lot of heavies, because he brings a lot of intensity to the roles. If you watch him in things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you can see him playing a very vulnerable character for a change, and he's just a fantastic actor. I can't say enough good about him. He clearly enjoys what he does, and he finds a way to give it his all. And for me, this is one of his top 3 performances.
Absolutely.
When I look at this, I look at Cuckoo's Nest, and I'm even though it's a smaller role, I'm a huge fan of what he does with Peter DeVries in David Lynch's Dune. So the guy just brings it every time he's on. He's in front of the camera. Oh, I'd be remiss if I also didn't mention Gemma Wormtongue, another favorable but small appearance he has.
I would recommend to anyone who has not watched this movie, or if you have, you want to watch it again, go back and look at the third act of the film where Brad Dourif loses it a couple of times. I mean, literally, he plays a very
was I raving?
Yeah. And it's just the way he could turn the motion on and off. and legitimately reach out to you through the screen with his eyes. You saw a little bit of it in the trailer there, and he scares the hell out of you with the just intensity that goes. But contrast that with Jason Miller, and I didn't know he had this in him. There's a point in the film where the Gemini killer is expelled because an exorcist shows up, it's in the title, and Pazuzu takes control again through Damian Karras. And so Damian is playing Pazuzu, and it's a whole different level of evil. It's a different kind of evil. It's and it's a calm, intense intensity to it that is just overwhelming and threatening. And there's a point where another actor that I want to talk about, George C. Scott, gives a soliloquy where he plays a detective who has lost all faith in humanity and God and everything. And then finally he believes. He sees with the mind, the eyes of faith, what is going on because of the devil. But George C. Scott offers this soliloquy about, I believe in all of these horrible things, and I believe in you. And the interaction between Jason Miller and George C. Scott there, I mean, it's a horrible realization. It's a very chilling scene, but it's so powerful. George C. Scott, I love him in this movie. However, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what do you think about him playing the role of Detective Kinderman versus the Kinderman that we saw in the first Exorcist? Because I think they're apples and oranges. So
it is. He's a very different character 15 years later in the time frame of the movie, and to the point where he was almost unrecognizable. Now you get two different actors doing two different interpretations of a character at two different points in time, and you almost feel like, even though he didn't have as much, he at one point he calls Damien like his best friend, and it's like, I didn't really see them having that relationship in The Exorcist.
Exactly.
They were just trying to get together. And now, if he'd have called Father Dwyer his best friend, that would have jived for me. So I don't know if that was where that came from. That felt very out of context, out of continuity.
I agree.
But I feel like looking at Father Dwyer and Kinderman here, that the events of that night have significantly haunted them, and it's left a scar on them. It's poisoned them in some way. They still struggle on. They still do the work. They go through the motions, and the father believes, but at the same time, he's not the same man either that we saw in the first movie, and again, played by an actor this time and not an actual priest.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been irrevocably altered by the experience, and not for the better, because to them it probably seems like a loss. Even though the little girl was saved, a dear man lost his life, as far as they were concerned. So they probably take that as a big L.
Now, I will say there's some, I'm going to open it up if you want to talk about anybody else in this film. But one of the things that struck me is that, once again, I think Blatty has hit on some things as a Catholic are very believable from the priest, from the Dyer's perspective. There's two things in particular. One is Kinderman and Dyer every year get together on the anniversary of Karras' death to keep each other company. And Dyer has to get his lemon drops before they go to see the movie because he got addicted to them listening to confessions. Well,
from children.
I knew a priest.
I can smell the lemon drops on those little cramps.
Yes. I knew a priest who got addicted to candies, to peppermints, and would eat them all the time because he would have them when he was hearing confession all the time, so he wouldn't cough. So he was always having candies and stuff like that.
And so Blatty, he's obviously had these conversations. He's done his research, and I love those little life details that get peppered into a really good piece of art. Love
Absolutely. It. The other one is, once again, he is showing that even though this horrible thing happened 15 years ago with the Regan McNeil, with the child that got possessed, the church leadership has learned nothing.
No, they haven't.
Detective Kinderman goes to them and he goes, he asked the person who is now the, I forget what his official title is.
Is
Yeah.
he like the archdiocese, or is he the cardinal, or I don't know. I'm not Catholic.
He's not a cardinal. He's it's kind of like
Bishop?
a rector position.
Okay.
So it's kind of like an administrator position. And the priest that gets killed had that position in the first Exorcist movie. And that's why they killed him. But he goes to him and he goes, "Do you believe in possession, Father?" He's like, "Who cares?" And the priest actually says, "Who cares?"
And we made that point because during the time of this film, we had talked about how the church was actually becoming rather secular. They stopped embodying Satan as a living being, a living force of some sort. They they start talking about, well, sin and evil's in your heart. It's not really an external thing. And they, crazily, the church, this is like what you're supposed to be all about, talking about God and Jesus, reformation, resurrection, and heaven and hell, and life after death, and sin and redemption. And they've started to become, what Karis kind of is, like a semi-atheistic shrinks.
Yeah.
Is how they're kind of approaching things.
Even to the point where the rector, I'm going to call him the rector, says, I've got more to worry about filling out forms for scholarships. You know, it's like, okay, that is important to take care of your flock, but you've got other spiritual concerns.
I mean, it really sounds like they don't believe. Like the path that Karis was on originally seems to have spilled over, and we discussed that was part of his job, is dealing with priests who are having crises of faith,
right?
Because every person who serves the Lord in that capacity, they do go through it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's just so well done. Now, before we go back, because there is something I want to ask you about with that, are there any other performances that you would want to highlight from this? Because I think the big three we've talked about, definitely Brad Dourif, Jason Miller, and George C. Scott dominate the movie.
Okay,
but
I don't have a file open with like the actors in the list, so I'll just name them by character.
Sure.
The bitch, as she calls herself, Nurse, is absolutely wonderful.
Nancy Fish is the actress's name.
She is such a pain in the ass, and it's kind of funny. Like, I know you said like this is in Washington D.C., but I kept getting like this New York vibe from the hospital. Like, people are yelling. I was like, "Who stuck him?" Like his GD nose is broke, and that's like, what kind of hospital is this? All these people are dropping F-bombs and cursing and shouting, and all hospitals are supposed to be quiet places. And I know it's a different time. Like, everybody's smoking in the hospital. Like, don't you guys know there's oxygen going on here and there?
It's a Catholic hospital on top of all that.
Yeah, Catholic hospital. So the hospital that my mom worked at for 20 years, like, they had nuns in there, even though it was like, St. Eugene. So yeah, I guess it was a Catholic hospital. I didn't think about it like that before, but it's affiliated with the, religion in some way. So there were nuns who were, nurses working there, and I never heard any of them dropping any bombs like that, and that blew me away. So like, it's so funny, like the idea of like, being having the caregiver mentality and the bedside manner, and she is just this gigantic pain in the ass. His friend just died, and he's trying to get some information out of her, and she's so confrontational. It's like, woman, what's wrong with you?
Let's call it like it is. She's a queen bee, man, and the B word, not.
So. She's like almost a step away from old Nurse Ratchet from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, she is large and in charge, and it's so funny. Even that when she has a moment with him later, she apologizes after he's punched out Karis when she's treating his hand, and she's evidently at that point come to realize, like, oh, Father Dwyer is his friend, and she just, like, out of the blue just says, like, yeah, I'm sorry. And you have to put it together, like, oh yeah, okay, she's going back to that. But then as soon as he he scares a kid, she's like, I can't wait for you to leave. Why are you still here? Like, she goes right back into bitch on wheels mode.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it seems like she really cares about like the benefit of this child. But now I'm also thinking, like, maybe she's like, oh God, I don't want to deal with this damn crying brat. Look at what you've done. You woke the baby, kind of thing. But she's absolutely fantastic, and I will say for a bit part, the mother-in-law was really funny.
Yeah.
The little racist mother-in-law, like she's like, yeah, they're a bunch of Jews and wops and all that. And that's a funny kind of thing because Kinderman kind of goes into like this little spiel about like some of his detectives being racist, and he goes home and he's got to deal with at least an anti-Semite mother-in-law. But she does save the day, and she drops some funny one-liners, which again, it gave me that New York City kind of feel of the attitude from New Yorkers I've known, where like, the nurse is there is like, so what, is she staying for dinner or what? That kind of attitude.
Well, there's another cool scene with George C. Scott, which just gives a little flavor.
Now, are you talking about the carp? Because that is one of the best moments in the film.
Yes.
Absolutely grand scene.
It was so funny. George C. Scott delivers his lines seamlessly without breaking character at all. This was a one shot. And Ed Flanders, who plays Father Dyer, could not listen to it without laughing, but it worked perfectly. So he's sitting there. You can see him through the scene. He keeps looking down.
Yeah, he's doing that, and he's putting his fist to his face.
Yeah.
And that works. It works because wouldn't you laugh if your friend was telling you this awful story? Like, I can't take a bath because my mother-in-law, who I'm not very fond of as it is, has brought a stupid fish and decided it's got to swim up and down in my, because we got to have the fish fresh.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't you just, oh, no, I brought a fresh fish, and like nobody gets to bathe because I want to eat a fresh fish. And I even love how he starts it like he doesn't blame the fish. He's like, I've got nothing against carp. It's tasty fish. And he talks about how like if he sees it, he's got to wait till the carp is asleep because he can't stand the sight of it swimming. It's like, if I see it swimming, I will kill it. And I keep thinking, you don't want to kill the carp. You want to kill your mother-in-law.
It's just so great. And the way that they did it, and I think it's one of those happy accidents, like I said, it's just the one character, him not being able to control his laughing, and George C. Scott's professionalism to deliver this with a straight face the whole time is perfect. It's absolutely
it's
perfect.
Like he has a couple of great character moments with the father. And there's there's the lemon drop conversation. There's the conversation they have when Flanders, Father Dwyer, goes into the hospital to get checked out for something, which we never find out. We only get a suspicion, so it's a little bit of a red herring to mess with you. And they have a great conversation about, just really random stuff, and you're like, well, what's the point of this? It doesn't seem to have a point, but it just gives you more of this kind of, Seinfeldian banter these two guys have developed over the years, because they kind of talk about nothing every now and again.
I will say that I think that the point is that all of those scenes we're talking about illustrate that they do have a friendship which is built up over the years, so that when Father Dyer is murdered, George C. Scott's reaction to it is that much more emotional. For us, the viewer.
When he screams at the director of the hospital, shut up, and then immediately after he just starts crying.
Yeah. Or when he has to look at his friend's body who's been beheaded, and mutilated. So it's pretty emotional.
I mean, George C. Scott he's one of the best actors that ever lived. So like, of course he's going to sell it. And you feel it viscerally, like in your gut. Like your chest aches for him.
Now, there are a couple other people I wanted to mention. One was Scott Wilson, who plays Dr. Temple.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Another great actor.
This guy is really good, and he really comes across as the neurotic, weak-willed psychiatrist who is being manipulated by, it's obvious from the way he is and what his problems are. He's chain smoking. He's got pornography up at his office wall. I mean, just
that was a nice bit of set dressing to give you an idea. because he's got a combination of occult mysticism with the tarot card picture of the hangman. He's got religious iconography because it is a Catholic hospital, and then he's got porn, and not just any porn. Like he's got a picture laid over the woman's head, so you can't even relate to this body as a person. It is a sexual body, and that's all. That's very telling from a psychologist of all things.
Yeah.
That's just pure lust. That's pure id. This is what I want. So he's got weaknesses and chinks in his armor. And one of the things I've got to say about his performance in that scene where he's been directed by the Gemini Killer to pass this note onto Kinderman.
Yep.
Is he keeps reading this dictate he's been given, and when he finally gets around to it, as you said, you see him chain smoking. His body language, he crunches in on himself, and you see that is a reaction to fear. That's very defensive, and even when he sits back, he keeps his hands up as he's smoking. He'll keep that other hand up. Again, a very defensive posture. Shoulders are rounded and sunken in. The man is terrified.
And he's sucking on that cigarette as a pacifier, as a way of trying to get some sense of control. I mean, the subtle things.
I've got to hand it to the actor for bringing all that body language in there, because it
really, really good. And all those subtle psychological hints are scattered throughout this movie. It's just that good. Another person I want to point out, he played I forget the guy's name, the mentor in Spawn.
He played Cagliostro. He played Merlin in Excalibur.
Yep.
Can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, which is shameful of me because he's one of the best actors.
Nicol Williamson.
Yes, he's actually been compared to Brando. That's how good this guy is, and he typically has this really powerful voice when he speaks. Like Spawn, use your armor. He's got this terrific voice, and my first introduction to him was Merlin in Excalibur, and I've just been hooked on the presence of this guy. And as soon as I saw him in the film, I was like, oh yeah, this guy's going to bring it. But surprise, surprise, he didn't get to be the Max von Sydow of the film.
Yeah, ironically, even though it's called The Exorcist III, the Exorcist, who is played by Father Morning, played by by Williamson, is hardly in the movie at all. But when he is in it, he's incredibly powerful. But we find out that even with that power, with that faith, because he truly has the faith, he's the one that basically gets the Gemini Killer sent back to wherever he goes, into the void. He's still defeated by Pazuzu.
Well, it seems like in this film, and there's something I realized after we reviewed the other film that I want to bring up here as well, because we discussed and the characters in the film had discussed, like, why was Reagan picked on? What was the point? And we discussed, like, maybe just the corruption of the innocent. And I came to realize, no, looking back at it, when the demon tells him, Father Karras, that it's a great day for an exorcism, he's like, oh, why would you like that? He's like, oh yes, it will bring us closer together.
Yep.
The target was always Father Karras because he was a faithless priest. And so now who is the target of this? Well, the Gemini Killer has a stake in this because obviously Kinderman was on the job when he was running around. And you can imagine he had something to do with his being caught. And on top of that, the demon Pazuzu, he seems to really enjoy going after people who are the easy mark. He likes to go after the faithless. People have at least had an association with faith, but are not necessarily faithful. So I think the whole thing was to claim Kinderman.
Well, they also feed on fear. I mean, there's a lot, that I would be reading into it. I'd love to have picked.
I'm just talking about within the context of the movie.
Yeah, I'd love to have picked Blatty's brain on this, but I see it a little bit differently in that, like I said, I have a friend who is an exorcist. I've talked to him several times about this, and one of the things that they're taught is that if you believe in this, so if you don't believe in this, take this just as background for the story. But is that the demons are, like to claim that they are omnipotent, that they know things, but they really don't. But they're very intelligent and can calculate the odds, see into the future, like 5D chess. So you could read into it that he kind of calculated that Karras would kill himself, and that, he saw, 2,500 moves ahead that this would come about, and he's
Well,
manipulating.
even that, like, Karras didn't immediately die, so he saw an opportunity.
Right.
So there's that, and the fact that as beings who are spiritual, so they're invisible, they're intangible, they do know things. They get around. They see what you're up to.
Yep.
And perhaps they can even read your mind. That's not clear. But even if they're just hovering around invisibly all day, every day, they will learn your secrets, which is why they love to tease you with things that's happened in your life.
And a little shameless self-promotion here. My novel, The Long Game, which is coming out at the end of this month. It's called The Long Game because the demon in there is playing a scheme which took 50 years to come up with and 25 years to come to fruition, but they've got the time, so, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because I don't want to spoil it, but, that is kind of the point there. So getting off then the actors' performances, I want to talk about some things that are related to the book, and I kind of want to hear your thoughts of some stuff. There's one scene in particular. People who love to talk about this movie online call it the Joker scene.
Okay, I actually tried to screen cap that because I wanted to send it to you, because like when Kinderman feels like there's an ominous presence in the church, there is a piece of statuary holding a dagger that looks like the flippin' Joker. And I was like, where did that come from?
Well, and the thing is before that statue was St. Francis of Assisi at the opening of the scene, holding a crucifix and the Bible. And then the head is chopped off and replaced with an actual Joker head. It is the Joker.
Okay.
And a dagger instead of the crucifix. Now, here's the thing. Blatty directed this movie, and I think he did a wonderful job. And I do want to talk about cinematography and everything. But he left some things deliberately vague that are spelled out more clearly in the book. So I'm going to throw this to you, and then I want your reaction. In the book, there are two spirits going around possessing people. There is James Veneman, the Gemini killer, who's been granted the body of Karras, who's moving into people, and Pazuzu, who is moving around through DC and manipulating events and doing all sorts of different stuff. And so in this scene, Pazuzu is in that office and is manipulating things. You hear the whispering at the beginning, which is what, and he stops the clock.
Well, they've got certain cues in the film to let you know that the demon is present, and they're different cues than the Gemini killer. The Gemini killer is very clearly just possessing people. But one of the things they do to indicate the presence of Pazuzu is the a demon of the air and the sky, and so he's got his four wings. He flies. He's the prince of the air. And so from the very beginning, you see paper fluttering. From the first scene in the movie, you'll see paper fluttering. And this paper fluttering always signifies the presence of Pazuzu. And you'll notice just before he goes out to explore the vestibule, a sheet of paper flutters in the stack of papers in, papers out, one of those things. And when they're not being very overt, they have the growl sound coming in.
Yeah.
They'll do it with paper. They'll do it with wind and paper fluttering.
Before George C. Scott goes out there, I watched this several times today. You can hear the statue being dragged from where it was out into the hallway.
Oh, I missed that.
And the person who did it is the secretary. The secretary is possessed when she gives the speech to him. And you could tell that he left the building because the lights are fluttering, and the immediate she goes out the building and the door closes, the lights go back. Yep.
Nice. That is such a nice subtle touch.
So I wanted to get your reaction to all that, because I think that is just incredible that one scene, which seems like so many people have misunderstand the scene and think it was there, that the Joker statue is there just for a jump scare, but really it's showing you the insidious presence of the demon all the time.
Was this the first thing Blatty ever directed?
I believe so. Let me double check.
That's absolutely, even if it's like just an earlier film period, it's incredible. And I guess maybe this comes from being an author, but man, he knows how to set things up. Because that's not just the only thing there. There's so many things that you can see once you look back at the film or once you rewatch it. You see the layers, the building, the building blocks that build to different events or scenes within the film. And that's another great thing, that he's using visual cues and sound cues and all that to just give you like, this is not some jump scare. I'm not doing a Stanley Kubrick where I'm cutting out frames and doing things like that, like The Shining. It's all very, very intentional.
He directed a grand total of 2 movies.
So he did this and Bug, wasn't it?
No, The Ninth Configuration in 1980.
Okay, I was actually looking at that to watch as well. Okay, I'm thinking of Friedkin, because Friedkin directed Bug, because he directed the first Exorcist.
The work he does in this film is so subtle in some places, is so layered, and I think it was misunderstood. I don't know how well this film did. I'm gonna look in a little bit, but I think
I'll tell you, if he wasn't a writer, he would have had a fine career as a director. I mean, like he's pulling out like some Hitchcockian, M. Night Shyamalan kind of moves, like when Shyamalan's on point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is some really densely layered stuff. It's absolutely astounding how well it comes off, which is why some of the things kind of put me off the first time, because he was going for like what almost felt like in some scenes is kind of cheesy, the big shocking auditory cue, like the discordant chords, and like here comes the person moving across the frame, a couple of things like that, and some things just like the lady crawling across the ceiling, that felt a little cheesy to me the first time through, and then later I again appreciate, like, okay, we're ramping up to this point of insanity almost, where like because the film is very much from Kenderman's point of view, and everything. This is a guy who doesn't believe in things. It's very grounded. It's very gritty. The world is nasty and ugly, and I've just got to survive in it and try and protect people. Mm-hmm. And then as things get weirder and weirder and weirder, that grounding sort of threw me off when I got to those points the very first time I watched this back in the day. But on a second viewing, it's like, okay, I see what you're doing now. I wasn't so critical about watching films back then. I was just watching them for pure enjoyment.
I mean, I think there were a few heavy-handed things in there. One is definitely that horror trope that is in so many movies, which was the lady walking on the ceiling. It's creepy, but it just seemed to be in there for pure creep factor, and really did make a whole heck of a lot of sense within the film. The other,
I think the first time I saw it, I kind of laughed, because they speed up her frame, so she's like skittering like a cockroach. She's got that kind of speed to her, mm-hmm. and she's not making any noise. It's like essentially big old lady roach on the ceiling.
Yeah, to go with old Papa Roach. So anyway, the other one was I don't know what it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why this looked a little hokey, but when the mother-in-law pulls Julie away from those giant scissors,
that also got me, because what they had to do there is if you look at the scene, in order to do this safely, they sped it up.
Okay.
So they got this big thing around this person's neck, and I've done some minor stunts with some of my people making short films and whatnot, and we're not a big production thing, and like in one of my films, I take a machete and I chop down to somebody's head. So I don't want to hurt somebody for real. So what I do is I put the machete here, and then I whip my hand up, and then I just reverse the footage. And so that way I could look like I really just pounded this guy in the head with a machete. So here, for the safety of the actress involved, you got this thing that, looks like it's made out of genuine metal, even if it's not sharp. You know, even if they've got these things blunted. I know like one edge had like a serrated kind of teeth on there. So they have the grandma grabber and they speed up the frame so it looks like she's yanking her out of the way very fast. But it does make it look a little weird.
Yeah, it looked like she had like Plastic Man neck, like her neck stretched or something. So
Yeah, it's just because the way it was the editing they did to make it look like it was a frantic kind of like scary thing. The thing to do would have probably been to have like because that's very very clearly metal. It would have been better if they could have had something that they could have chromed in some way that was actually safe, like polyurethane, some sort of like a not the foam latex, but the harder latex foam that they use for certain props. That would have been better. It would have been safer. You could have probably done it at regular speed in camera. And they probably also didn't want to yank this young lady's neck really hard. That's the thing. Like when you want to do a scene in a film, like where you're going to snap somebody's neck, you grab their face and you let them whip their head. Because if you whip their head, you might actually have a legitimate problem on your hands. So
right.
Again, that might have been just like, I've got my hand on you, like you're gonna snatch your head away, and I'll just move with you. Again, it's all for safety. It wasn't entirely successful because of what they had to do, but minor thing.
Now, I will say, I personally thought that the research that Blatty did and the methods of killing and the medicals and research he did was amazing.
Oh man, that was so cool. I mean, like creepy, but cool.
Yeah, and the way and I will go back to this line. Brad Dourif details to Kinderman how he killed his friend, giving him these detailed what's the word?
3-foot catheter.
Biological knowledge, knowledge of the body. As he's talking about, putting it up this certain vein and pushing the blood out. It's horrific. But the fact that Blatty knew all about the drugs that they were used and how they work and everything, really, really amazing writing there. So,
yeah, and I don't know if it was inspired by that, but my wife and I, we do like to watch like Forensic Files and like these kind of serial killer murder mystery things. I don't know, just kind of interested in like what makes people do weird stuff like that. And as an author of fiction, you kind of study up on all the horrible things that can happen in the world if you want to write scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen some murder cases where the killer in question did use a drug similar to that would cause an instant paralysis. Now it didn't have to be as fine tuned as the acetylcholine, I believe it was.
Yeah, I forget what it was. I don't want anybody out there. Don't get any ideas out there, any aspiring killer. So
yeah, too late. They've seen the movie. But yeah, like this, you could just shoot somebody, pop it real quick, and it would paralyze them instantly. Terrifying, because then they get to do every naughty thing with you, and you're awake for it. You're paralyzed, but you're awake.
Yeah, and it's absolutely horrific in this film. Some of the murders. I mean, I think the book is incredible, and the movie pretty much follows the book. There's some minor stuff cut out. You get a lot more detail about the Gemini killer and why he is the way he is in the book. But it's worth a read. But I think the movie, does justice to the book, and that's not always true.
Yeah,
but
he has a pretty good motivation. It feels, again, I have to feel like the author did his research. That the Gemini killer wants to shame his dad, who was a religious man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm killing daddy over and over again. I'm embarrassing daddy over and over again because of the names with the K that relates to all of that. And but he enjoys like it's kind of interesting that he enjoyed the idea of the randomness, because if your father is this religious figure, well, obviously he believes in a ordered universe. Everything happens for a reason. God's on his throne. Like, okay, so he's basically Cletus Cassie. He's Carnage, like randomness. Yeah. There's nothing going on, and maybe that's why they had the Joker in there, because before Carnage we had the Joker, who was the epitome of chaos and random murder.
He's pure chaotic evil.
Yeah.
So, now we're going to get into this, and then I'm going to talk. We're going to end about talking about how this film did and why. But I want to talk a little bit about the direction of this film and the look of the film, how Peter Blatty did as a film director. And I will say, before I push it over to you, that it is, to me, is striking that this film went back to the same color that, the what's the word I'm looking for?
Color palette.
Yeah, the color palette that you had for the first Exorcist. It went back to the same kind of shots, the same kind of wide shots of Georgetown to give you a feel and everything, versus what you had in The Exorcist II, which felt like something out of Andromeda Strain half the time. It was just absolutely horrible. So, and I think that was in fact, I know it was a deliberate decision by William Peter Blatty. But I wanted to get your take on the rest of how he shot the film as a whole, because we've talked a little bit about some of the stuff he's done, but what stands out for you, good or bad?
Well, I think the film is gorgeous to look at. A lot of the shots, the framing of how he decides to frame characters, like in our favorite little conversation there about the carp. He has a very tight frame on George C. Scott and Flanders as they're discussing the carp, and it's so perfect the way he's like, "Now, Father, you're very close to me right now, so I'm sure you can tell I haven't bathed in 3 days." And it's like, the framing of that is so beautiful because the shot just keeps tightening and tightening and tightening in until he gets to that line. So the guy is really incredibly masterful at what he can do. Again, the one of the few shots that felt a little bit weird and disappointing was the lady crawling across the ceiling. I think he was just trying to maybe top the scene that got cut with Reagan running down the stairs upside down.
I will say this, this kind of goes away from what, the last part I want to touch about, which is how the film did. The company, the production company came back and did a lot of stuff in post-production and amped it up. So like all of the stuff at the end with like the crucifix coming up off the ground and everything was done at the behest of the studio.
Interesting. Okay, because I was kind of surprised at how I felt like he was trying to be more subtle, because The Exorcist had some pretty overt stuff. Reagan's floating, the head turning around, the vomiting, all that stuff. And I remember watching Siskel and Ebert reviewing The Omen 3 and talking about how disappointed they were that Damien gets taken out with one of the 7 daggers. He sees Christ appearing in the sky, and he's like, "You have won nothing, Nazarene." And he's like, "Oh man, I wanted to see like Damien throwing fireballs and Jesus throwing lightning." And it was like it felt like that's what they wanted to. They decided, like, "We hear you, Siskel and Ebert. We're going to do this here." Because it got very special effectsy. Now, granted, there's a lot of it I actually like, because I didn't feel like that was a metaphysical battle. We weren't actually seeing it, of course. You see when he gets killed, the room goes back to normal. But I kind of dug the fire, and I dug all the cobras and the snakes and things like that. Well, and I thought the shots actually looked pretty good, even in that.
Well, if you go back and watch the scene, I think this is a case where, for the most part, I don't know about the lady crawling on the ceiling, whose idea that was. So I'm going to leave that aside. But in this scene in particular, in those conversations where, either with Father Morning, with the snakes and the bugs and everything, there was a compromise there between the studio and the director. And if you go back and watch, Blatty will have, like, for instance, Father Morning, all of these things are crawling all over him, and then all of a sudden everything is normal. And it's supposed to be that all of this is in the mind, all of this is spiritual battle. And that in reality,
that's kind of how I took it.
There. Yeah.
Like I said, it's metaphysical. I thought, I got to say, a nice touch was they described how the Kitterman kid, how his body had been replaced by a piece of statuary, and the head was done in blackface. And before we see Karas crucified, we see young Kitterman crucified with the Jesus head, with the blackface on it,
through the eyes too.
Yeah. Like I was like, wow, that was pretty shocking, because you don't often see children just getting murdered in a film, and that was pretty good.
We have to give a shout out. There was a cameo from Fabio in the movie playing an angel. So.
Very, very surreal scene as they're, and again, you're talking about shots and things. I like the surrealness of that. When he would do the dream sequences, I don't know if you noticed, but in the opening dream sequence, which the dreams tell us about murders occurring or about to occur.
Yep.
And as we were going down the street, there's a dark figure that runs across the street, and and then we see the kid. And as we go down, just before we see the kid, again, another dark figure runs across the street in the opposite direction. Then we finally see the kid, and I was like, "That's very interesting." So that's the evil, catching up with the kid, and of course, Father Dyer, he had the neck sutures, so like, oh, Father Dyer's dead, and it's not going to be lung cancer like we thought, and we're going to find him headless.
Yeah.
So some really great stuff like that. But my favorite scene in the movie is actually the scene that tends to creep people out more than anything else, and that's the nurse decapitation, because he takes so much time building that and that framing it. Like most of the scene is done this steady shot,
static shot,
cameras on a stick, set up on that hallway. Like we get like one or two little quick asides, her at the desk, the guy inside the room, we get the little jump scare there, but most of it just sits there, and there's no music, nothing to give you that auditory cue. So when the possessed woman finally does come out to take the nurse's head, and that music hits, it's like the shower scene in Psycho, and like you're so waiting for the other shoe to drop. And he's had this long shot of the hall, and when that happens, you zoom on in, and you're like, oh crap!
And it's almost
brilliantly executed.
It's almost Hitchcockian, because the suspense that he builds with the little sounds, and then
the little
he throws us for a loop.
Noise.
Yeah, because she goes into one room and it's ice.
Yes,
and so we're like, suddenly you get the sense of relief, even though as a viewer that something is going to happen.
Now, if you've ever been in a hospital late at night, I had to, when my wife was going through cancer and her operation to deal with it. So I was there at the hospital all night, and I've seen the same thing. It's weird. Any place with like long hallways. I've worked late at schools when I was going to school. And I'm the only one there. Security guard let me alone. It's like, hey, I don't have a computer that can handle this at home. Like, I'm learning graphic design. So you get to any place that's got these, they appear to be safe. They're nice. They're clean. They're all this, like hospitals, schools, whatever. But you empty out the life, and you empty out the light, and all of a sudden they become uber creepy, and your mind starts mucking with you. And so I can totally see like that ice melting in the glass, and she's like, well, there have been some murders out here, and I'm a little on edge thinking about it, even though there's a cop right over here. Things have been weird lately. You keep hearing about all these crazy killings. So yeah, it's totally legit how that would play on that gal.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and just the way that he builds the suspense of the scene is incredible. I mean, I really do think it's a shame that he only did this movie. And I don't know why, but it seemed like he only did it because he wanted to make sure if you were going to do Exorcist III, that it be done right.
Well, I would love to talk to him, like you said, because after Exorcist II, he's like, okay, the only way I'm going to license this out is if I get to write and direct. I'm not just writing, I'm directing this sucker too. And unlike Stephen King with Maximum Overdrive, I won't be blitzed out of my mind on cocaine the whole time.
You have just shined the spotlight on the elephant in the room. Most people, you could say what you want about the critics. It has a better than average critic score, but most people who are horror fans who watch this movie end up falling in love with it.
Yeah.
However, like I said, it's totally different look from Exorcist II. Exorcist II was one of the worst movies ever made. William Peter Blatty begged the studio not to name this movie Exorcist III. He didn't want it to have any association with the Exorcist name at all, because the Exorcist II had ruined the franchise.
Should have called it like Exorcist Gemini
or Legion. He wanted
Yeah,
it to be called,
Legion.
or anything. He wanted to be something
Because it was based off the book Legion, but I know this. Yeah, Exorcist Legion would have worked because the studio is going to want that branding. They're going to want that continuity.
Right. Well, the studio insisted on it. This movie cost $11 million to make. General rule of thumb is you usually spend as much money on marketing as you do to make it. So $22 million. Domestically, it made $28 million.
So
worldwide,
flop.
it made $42 or $46 million. So it was a flop. And
yeah, usually you want to make back 3 times your investment to be considered a success when it comes to movies.
It opened number 1 in the box office and stayed at number 1 for 3 weeks and then fell off dramatically. And when Blatty went to, I'm reading right here from the entry on his interview, when he went to the studio and asked them why, they said that it didn't have any traction because people associated it with The Exorcist 2.
There you go.
So which goes to show just how much a hit and miss success in Hollywood can be.
Well, this can make or break things. The film that came before, like as you saw during Halloween, I was mostly every day. I have this tradition of watching a horror movie every night during October, and I decided this year I was going to post up little mini reviews as tweets.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was Halloween Ends, and I absolutely loathe the film because it was a continuation from Halloween Kills, which was a bad movie.
Mm-hmm.
Halloween 2018 was actually pretty good, and it had some interesting ideas in it that they didn't really pay into because I think they were considering this was going to be a one and done, that they were going to kill Michael Myers in the fire at the end of that film, and like, oh, it made a lot of money, so of course we got to make the inevitable sequel. And then they made this horrible, stupid, weird, trying to build a whole new mythology. It might as well have been like the Curse of Thorns or whatever they did back in Halloween 5. Just got really dumb, and they realized that was really dumb. So when they tried to do something new with this film, I wasn't in the right frame of mind to take it in the way I should have. Because if Halloween Ends had come right off of the 2018's Halloween, I would have liked that film a great deal more. It would have made more sense to me. The continuity between the two stories would have worked because Laurie Strode now goes to living like a normal grandmother in a home in suburbia because she thinks Michael Myers is dead. Everybody thinks he's dead. There's all this stuff going on. And the idea of this passing of the torch was actually a pretty darn cool idea. Right. They just fumbled it horribly because they turned Michael Myers into this super monster at the end of the film. And then in this film, like, he's a weak 68-year-old man who gets a little bit stronger as he kills people. Like, nah, you blew it, man. It's the what was it, like the Last Jedi of the Halloween franchise. It just ruined it, right in the middle.
Yeah,
so it's important. It's important. Like the sequence that you see films is a very important.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to me, and that, but it shouldn't be. That basically this film was ruined by a film that came over a decade earlier. It had been a decade, and still it existed in the public conscience.
It's really too bad because I was fine, like, for instance, to jump back on Halloween, I was fine with Halloween 2 being the end of Michael Myers' story, and Halloween 3 being its own thing. I actually like Halloween 3 quite a bit, even on my first viewing. But because Michael Myers had become like this horror movie icon, Halloween 3 failed. It had to get that cult status years later.
Absolutely.
So yeah, man, like a bad movie can screw up a whole franchise.
And thankfully, though, that's kind of one of the things that we do here, and I don't think we're going to be responsible for Exorcist 3 getting a following because it has a following now. But over the years, people have picked it up. And I'm the same way. I was in school and in the Army when this movie came out, so I didn't see it when it came out. Mm-hmm. But when I saw this, in the Blockbuster back in the day, I'm dating myself, I didn't pick it up because I was like, Exorcist 3. I saw Exorcist 2. That was bad. Most of my experience with the movies that started going into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 was just like, oh man, it gets worse.
Thankfully for me, I actually caught Exorcist III. I didn't even know Exorcist 2 was a thing. I guess it was so bad it didn't even hit my radar back then. And so when I did see Exorcist 2, I was like, oh God, yeah, no wonder. Yeah. No. I'm glad I saw these in this sequence, because maybe I would have skipped out on Exorcist 3 because Exorcist 2 was just that bad.
Well, I picked this movie up in a bargain bin in like late 90s and watched it, and I was flabbergasted because I was like, this movie is amazing. I loved it right from the very beginning, and it's been a big influence on me, writing style and everything. I think it is an incredible movie. And then from there, I went and picked up the books by William Peter Blatty, and those are really good as well. So I can recommend those as well. So with that said, final thoughts on Exorcist III. What are your final verdict on this movie?
I'm going to throw out a shout out to my boy Akito one more time, because I asked him what it was like to be, here's your first gig and you're opposite George C. Scott. And, it's just a brief little interaction, but he said, George was a terrific guy. He was very generous and giving to somebody who's just getting into the business, and because it's like really intimidating for him as a child. Like, oh God, I gotta do like even a brief scene with George C. Scott. He said like, nah, but he was really great. And as for the movie itself, I think after watching it, even though you can look at it and you see it's got its place in time, it's a dated film. It can't help but be when you see rotary phones and things like that. But it still holds up. It is still a great film. It's one that I go back to every now and again, because I don't like to watch too many films, like every year. I like to give myself a little time to kind of forget a few things or rediscover a few things. But this is one of those classics as far as I'm concerned. It's a classic, and it's so worth studying, especially if you want to make films and or horror movies, because man, just the way it's structured, the way it's built, the way the pacing and the visual and the auditory cues, like the music doesn't play as big a part in this, except for those jarring moments. But the way it sets things up, I'm so impressed with the sound design in here, on top of everything else. So, like, hats off to everybody who worked on this project.
Absolutely. I will say, my final thought on this film is that I just lost my train of thought. I think this is a great example of a movie where, like I said, I think The Exorcist is kind of a standalone film. There are other movies that are somewhat similar, but they are very rare. Another one that brings to mind, there are mostly exorcism movies for some reason. Like The Exorcism of Emily Rose is kind of the same kind of movie. But I don't know. I mean, it is a horror movie, but it's not traditional horror movie.
Oh, Emily Rose, that was rough.
Yeah. This movie, I think, combines elements of both. And it's one of the instances where I've seen some interference with the studio that ended up becoming a happy accident for the most part.
Sometimes it works out.
Yeah. And I think that the blending of that very cerebral horror that is The Exorcist. I mean, yes, I say cerebral. There are some very shocking moments in there. Don't get me wrong. But this is more about the spiritual battle and everything like that. Along with some traditional horror elements, because we do have jump scares in this. We do have some traditional, some side, effects and things like that. So
I have a question for you. I'd like to get your take on this.
Sure.
The demon tells the detective, "I'm going to help you with your faith," and then he gives his monologue, and he ends with saying, "I believe in you." Unlike Father Karras, he doesn't seem to come around to the faith in God that Karras does, which allows him to save the day at the end. What do you? And even though he tells Karras he's free before he puts a final bullet in his head, I kind of feel like that Kinderman, even after all he's seen, all he's done, he still has this ambivalent feeling about God. What do you think?
I agree. And I think it's interesting because I think what he's really playing with, and you see this even in like Anne Rice wrote Memnoch the Devil, and you see this kind of conversation in there where evil does more to bring people into believing in the existence of God than God itself does sometimes. So people are more, and it's like they're turned off to God because they expect God to stop evil, and all its forms. And it's such an interesting juxtaposition, a contrast between the two things, because there are a lot of people who will say, it's kind of this thing when you write characters that are evil in this way, not a Michael Myers or a Jason or something like that. There are people who say that evil only has as much power as it gives you. And then there's the opposite view where evil can overwhelm. Tolkien had this idea where you could be as good as you want and you could still end up dying,
Yeah. And that's valid. Cause we whether you're a Christian or not, like if you are a Christian, you'll see in the Bible where like even the best men falter. Solomon, who had literally all the wisdom a man could have, it was gifted to him. He does very unwise things. King David commits murder. So like nobody is above falling. We can all fall as long as we're in this world. And I did notice that the demon in this story has a lot more power than he did. In the first movie, Pazuzu's like, I don't want to do any of these gross displays of power. And what does he do? He rips the skin off of poor Father Morin. Is like, geez, like, wow, he's really going for it this time.
And if we're gonna get it, and I like this discussion. But if we're going to get into it, I think that the reason that he has so much power goes all the way back to the very beginning and the conversation that Kinderman has with Dyer in the restaurant and the changes in Kinderman. It is obvious in the 15 years since Father Karras died that the world has gotten worse, that all he is seeing is evil and crime. And this is what he confesses to the demon at the end, where he's like, I believe in hatred, I believe in racism, I believe in this, I believe in that,
and slime and stink and filth, and I believe in you. Yeah. And I couldn't help but think it threw me back to a line from Oh God with George Burns. He referenced The Exorcist. He's like, people see this movie, they believe in the devil, but they still don't believe in me. He's like, well, you can't believe in one without the other, but people do. People are very, even with everything Kinderman's seen, experience, it's so much easier for him to accept evil than that there's good beyond the world.
And I think, and this is just me, postulating here, there is a moment. I do think Kinderman believes in God, but I think that he's angry with God.
Yeah, because he does call out to him at one point.
Yeah, and the demon taunts him and goes, "Have I cured your faith?"
Yes,
and I think that's so telling. And the demon is using Kinderman's newfound faith to taunt him and torture him even more, and but I think the interesting thing here is Blatty gives us all this, but then gives us hope as well, because the demon is taunting, the demon is gloating in his moment of victory and saying, there is no light here, God is not here, only darkness and everything. And then
we get that beam of light.
Beam of light on and Morning is not dead. Father Morning is not dead. And he is able to.
And what a great name, too. Like Father Morning, which has several different contextual things to it.
Yeah. And he is able to distract the demon just long enough for Kinderman to shoot Karras. Now.
And we do end with Father Karras being laid to rest on holy ground amongst all these other Jesuit priests who are out there.
Yep.
He's home.
Now he's
amongst the other saints, if you will.
Now the only thing, as a writer, that doesn't feel right about that ending, if I was writing this in a book, as a movie, it wraps up fine. If I was writing in this book, unfortunately, Kinderman has done the right thing and shot Karras and put him to rest, and he is going to have to pay for what he did.
Yeah, I was actually kind of
and put up for murder. So
yeah, I was expecting that to be how they were going to end, because honestly, I think I would have cut the film, bang, fade to black, credits, right
and let
there.
you guess what his fate is.
Yeah,
because there's no way that you could ever put on a defense that says it was the Gemini killer and he was
there's the devil in this guy and a serial killer and
yeah.
So Kinderman's life as he's known it is effectively over. At the very least, he's going to be sitting in one of those little rooms getting analyzed.
Yeah. And how Token-esque is that, really? I mean, it's one of those things where congratulations, you have defeated evil and you are changed and scarred for the rest of your life for it.
But if you look at it biblically and historically, as far as people are considered saints often have to pay a tremendous price in the fight against evil. True. Samson ends up crushing himself along with the Philistines. Joan of Arc is burned at the stake after winning a great victory for God and the faith. There's a price to be paid in blood for doing the right thing sometimes. And so I thought that was going to be Kinderman's fate here. And so
True.
I wonder if that was another little thing that the studio tacked on.
It's never really
feel-good end.
It's never addressed in the book, so it might be. It might be something they added in there. I don't think it's a horrible ending to the movie.
No, and you kind of need a win as an audience at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I could have totally, if I'd been making out, I'd probably ended up the gunshot, fade to black. Boom.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I would say that going back to my final verdict on the film, though, I just think it's one of those films where we have gotten the cerebral, spiritual, and the traditional horror with the effects and everything all wrapped up into one. And later on we are going to get movies that combine, that do this cerebral, paranormal. One that comes to mind that I think is incredibly well done is The Fallen, but that's it's not a traditional horror movie. This movie stands alone and really being able to bridge those two genres.
That's kind of a supernatural thriller.
Yeah, it really is. And if they hadn't brought in those horror elements, I think that's what this movie could end up being.
Well, here's what I love about this film is, for at least the first 2/3 or so, even though it's attached to this other movie, it's a detective story. And it's a damn good detective story. It's a real, genuine psychological thriller. And I was impressed by, if you take out all the spooky stuff, all the supernatural stuff, this would be a great film about somebody trying to hunt down the Gemini killer.
It is a really good whodunit.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, without shame, my book series takes a lot of inspiration from this movie. Now, I had my own story and everything, my own characters, but I love this movie that much that it really influenced me a lot. This movie and The Exorcist, the first one, were huge influences on me. Those and The Omen and things like that. So
if you gotta pick something to be an inspiration or a foundation, this is not a bad place to go.
Absolutely. All right, cool. So that is The Exorcist III. We just a little housekeeping here. Next week we'll be doing John Carpenter's Vampires. Then, as I said, we're going to be doing Rush, and then we're going to finish up November with The Great Escape, starring Steve McQueen, and
Steve McQueen,
among many others. And then we will be getting into the Christmas season. We will be taking the last 2 weeks, the last 2 Fridays of December off, and we will also be at that point. Man, I can't believe it is this close. We'll be prepping for Blood World campaign to go live. So watch for that as well. So with all that said, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here with me today.
Always a pleasure.
Awesome. I want to give a shout out to Steve and Lance. Hope you guys are well. Hope you have a great weekend.
Yep. Lance is recording once again for one of his own little mini features. So hope he's having a good time in the recording booth.
And it has a tie into Bob Non-Union Psychic, which is also out from ASAP Imagination.
Very cool.
Yeah. And while I'm on that, I will say, go check out ASAP Imagination and pick up your copies of OPSEC 1 and 2. Anything you want to plug shamelessly before we go, Jeff?
Just Rain Cross Press, just Blood World. The fact that I am working on my own stuff, Mr. Happy, Symbols of Liberty. I've got endless ideas for projects. It's like, oh God, I can't write it all. I can't draw it all. But hopefully one day we'll see things like Clownpocalypse and Attack of the Zombie Dinosaurs and Pipe City, which is a weird mashup comic idea I got. And yeah, hopefully one day I'll get the Nudist out as well.
All right.
The most scantily clad superheroine of all time.
So, superheroine.
Superheroine.
All right,
You
folks.
You can
Go
snort it
find
or
me-
take it intravenously.
To find the Nudist. So, anyway, with that said, I want to thank you all for watching Cinema Crusaders. Join us next week as we talk vampires. And remember, everybody, have a great weekend and keep that popcorn warm. Watch those movies, and we will see you next week on the Cinema Crusaders. See you later, everyone.